a battered German shepherd limped alone through a blizzard. No tag, no sound, just pain in his eyes and blood in the snow. Most cars swerved. Most people looked away. But not him. Officer Jack Monroe, new to the town, still haunted by a partner he couldn't save, hit the brakes. He stepped out into the storm, not knowing that this dog would lead him to a secret prison, a missing officer long presumed dead, and a bond that defied orders, time, and fear itself. What happened next will restore your faith in loyalty, love, and the silent courage of those who never give up. Before we begin, hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and turn on the notification bell. Stories like this find you when you need them most. Pine Bridge, Montana, late October, 4:47 p.m. The first snowstorm of the season rolled in without warning. One moment, the pines stood quiet under a lean sky, the next, they were swallowed by snow. Thick, wet flakes danced sideways in the wind, clinging to branches, piling along the curves of Timberline Pass. The road twisted upward, narrow and rimmed with drop-offs that vanished into fog. It was the kind of weather that made even locals stay in and stack more wood near the hearth. But Officer Jack Monroe didn't have that option. Seated behind the wheel of his patrol SUV, Jack navigated the slope in low gear, his windshield wipers swiping back and forth in a steady rhythm. The radio offered only static. Silence clung to the world outside like frost on the glass. Jack, 28, was built like a man born for forward motion, tall, compact, and quietly coiled with the energy of a soldier who hadn't yet left the battlefield. For years as a Marine had chiseled his body into muscle and memory. 2 years in narcotics with the Bureau had hardened the rest. He wore his dark brown hair short, his jaw permanently shadowed with stubble, and his gray eyes held a look most people mistook for detachment. But it was just tiredness that never slept. He had arrived in Pine Bridge 3 weeks ago under circumstances no one asked about, and he never explained. The file simply said, reassigned after failed operation. But Jack remembered every second of it. Emily Carter had been more than a colleague. She'd been the steady voice in his earpiece, the only one who saw the patterns he missed, the one who'd stood beside him at the docks of Pier 17 before gunfire split the silence. She'd gone in early to plant surveillance but never came out. Her GPS had gone dark. Her comms had flatlined. Jack, pinned down by bullets, screaming her name, was forced to choose between chasing ghosts or saving the men bleeding beside him. The Bureau filed her as missing, presumed dead. Jack hadn't forgiven them or himself. The snow fell heavier now. Visibility dropped to 30 feet. He eased off the accelerator as he rounded a bend notorious for black ice. That's when he saw it, a dark shape, dead center of the road, not moving. He slowed. It was a dog, a large German shepherd, standing still in the storm. Jack braked gently, the SUV sliding a few inches before stopping. The wind howled past as he leaned forward, squinting through the glass. The dog's coat was a mess of black and tan, soaked and clinging to its frame. One of its hind legs was drawn up, shaking, injured but not broken, its ribs pressed against the skin. Blood, dried and dark, marked its side, but it didn't cower, didn't bark. It just stood there, watching him. Its ears were stiff, tail down but not tucked. Amber eyes, clear and old in a way that made Jack's chest tighten, locked onto his. He stared back, unmoving. Most people would have honked, swerved, or driven on, but Jack opened the door and stepped into the cold. The snow swallowed him instantly. Wind bit through his uniform. He pulled his jacket tighter and took a few slow steps toward the shepherd. "Hey there, bud," he called softly. "You okay?" The dog didn't flinch, didn't move, just stared. Jack crouched, palms open. "You're hurt. Let me help." Then, without sound or ceremony, the dog turned, limped 2 steps, paused, looked back, then limped again off the road into the trees. Jack stood frozen. This wasn't chance. This wasn't some stray with nowhere to go. The dog had come to him, had waited for him. His breath fogged the air. Snow gathered on his shoulders. The woods beyond looked dense, uncertain. He glanced back at the SUV. The radio buzzed, but no new dispatch, no backup, no witnesses. His hand went to his sidearm out of habit, then settled. Slowly, Jack Monroe took a step forward and followed the dog into the snow. Jack moved carefully, boots sinking into soft layers of snow as he followed the wounded shepherd through the forest. The dog's gait, heavy, uneven, pushed forward with quiet urgency, as if driven by a purpose beyond instinct. The trees here stood taller, closer together, pines leaning in with ancient whispers carried on the wind. Snow clung to their limbs like secrets. No path marked the dog's direction, but it never hesitated, weaving between trunks, climbing slight rises, crossing a shallow frozen creek that cracked under Jack's weight. The deeper they went, the more Jack felt it, that uneasy knot behind his ribs, the one familiar from ambush zones and interrogation rooms. Something wasn't right here, not just with the dog, not just with the storm, but something older, more layered, a kind of absence that made the air feel heavier than the snow. The shepherd limped ahead, pausing only when Jack lagged, ears twitching backward. There was intelligence in those eyes, not the kind trained for sit and stay, but the kind built through years of reading human tension, learning when a room was about to go wrong. Jack had worked with dogs like that, elite K9s, partners, not tools. This one had once belonged to someone who mattered. The terrain sloped sharply after 20 minutes. Jack followed the shepherd over a ridge and down into a narrow cut of earth between two large rocks, a shallow ravine, its bottom lined with pine needles, black ice, and a dusting of powder undisturbed by wind. The dog stopped at a small outcrop just below a twisted cedar tree and began pawing at something half buried beneath snow and fallen leaves. Jack jogged the last few steps and crouched beside him. It wasn't a bone or scrap of clothing. It was black plastic. He reached in, pulled the object free, and brushed the frost off the casing. The shape was too familiar, a covert ops locator beacon, military grade, battered, the strap torn as if ripped away in a struggle. On the inside of the casing, nearly worn smooth from friction, were faintly carved letters, E. Carter. His breath caught. He hadn't spoken her name aloud in over 6 months, not since that final report came through, not since they closed her file with a shrug and 2 lines, no recovery. Presumed Kia. But here was her gear. And the dog that led him here hadn't just guessed this location. Jack stared at the beacon, turning it over in gloved hands. The ID was faded but legible. It was one of the off-grid units issued only for deep-cover narcotics infiltrations. Emily had requested one just weeks before her final mission, paranoid about a mole in their division. "Don't trust the comms," she'd whispered to him after one meeting. "And don't trust Reynolds. There's something off about him." Jack had dismissed it at the time. Leader Warren Reynolds was slick, polished, and politically untouchable, mid-40s, silver hair, pressed suits, a voice made for congressional hearings. He smiled too easily, drank water like he was in a toothpaste commercial, and had a reputation for results. Emily hated him, said he fast-tracked busts to earn headlines, took risks that got people killed, and played favorites. Now Jack wondered if she'd been right. The dog sat beside him, panting lightly. A thread of blood ran down its rear leg, mixing with the snow. It made no sound. Jack touched the dog's flank gently. "You brought me here, didn't you?" The shepherd didn't blink. Jack stood, scanned the area. Nothing, no fresh footprints, no drag marks, but the beacon hadn't been out here long. It wasn't yet buried by ice. Someone had been here recently. He reached for his radio, but static screamed in his ear. The signal was garbage this deep. He'd have to hike back to the road. The idea of leaving this place, even for a moment, filled him with dread. He slid the beacon into his coat, then turned to the dog. "Let's get you help, then we figure this out." The dog didn't move, just stared up at him. Jack exhaled. Emily, a name he never stopped carrying. As he prepared to head back, his thoughts turned again to the last mission, the raid on Pier 17, how she insisted on planting surveillance herself, how her voice cut off mid-word. He'd never seen the footage. Reynolds had ordered it locked down under ongoing internal review. Jack had pushed once, just once, and that's when the transfer order came. Pinebridge, the quiet town in the mountains. No one really chose it, except maybe Emily. Maybe she'd been sent here. Maybe she never left. The thought rattled inside him like a bullet casing on concrete. He looked down at the shepherd again. "You know where she is, don't you?" No bark, no whine, just the still, solemn look of an animal carrying weight too big for its body. Jack made a silent promise, he'd come back to this place, and he wouldn't come alone. They turned toward the slope and began the slow climb back out of the ravine, the wind behind them now, whispering between the trees like a voice on the edge of memory. The storm eased by midnight, leaving behind a town wrapped in silence. Pinebridge slept under a heavy blanket of snow, the roads hushed, the rooftops glittering faintly beneath a pale moon. The wind had stopped screaming and now only whispered through cracks in old shutters and chimneys. Inside his modest two-room rental on the edge of town, Jack Monroe sat hunched at the dining table, his coat still on, hands dirty with half-melted pine needles and soil from the forest floor. On the table lay the damaged locator beacon marked E. Carter, beside a steaming mug of gas station coffee, long gone cold. The house smelled of damp wool, metal, and dog fur. Shadow lay curled by the foot of the bed nearby, his breathing shallow but rhythmic. Jack had cleaned the dog's leg wound with a first aid kit from his patrol truck and wrapped it with gauze and a torn flannel shirt. The shepherd hadn't protested, just looked at Jack with those amber eyes, like he understood this wasn't their first silent exchange. When Jack moved to the kitchen, Shadow followed. When Jack collapsed on the couch for an hour of restless sleep, the dog lay beside him, head resting on one paw, twitching in dreams that sounded like grief. Now, hours later, Jack picked up the beacon again and turned it slowly in his hands. The unit had been intentionally smashed, a clean blow to the battery, wires gutted. Whoever left it in the woods didn't want it found, but someone had to know. Emily wouldn't have gone out there without a plan. She never did anything without layers of thought underneath. He stood, walked to the bookshelf, and pulled a worn binder from the middle, Casework, Operation Rainfall. That had been the code name for the sting at Pier 17. Most of the documents were redacted or locked, but he'd kept a few things: Emily's written notes, photos of the warehouse floor plan, and a folded terrain map of the outskirts surrounding the drop site. He laid the map flat under the light. Shadow stirred but didn't lift his head. Jack scanned the margins, running his finger along the ink-smudged edges. Then he saw it, almost missed it, a thin red line, hand-drawn, barely visible beneath the folds, leading north beyond the warehouse perimeter toward the backcountry ridges just outside town. A jagged X was marked beside a stream bend, and beside it, in Emily's hurried handwriting, Old Bunker, Northridge. Jack stared. Northridge, a small forest region north of Pinebridge, once used for Cold War drills, now abandoned and overgrown. A cluster of emergency shelters had been built into the terrain, camouflaged and forgotten. Only a few still existed on record, the rest were buried, literally and bureaucratically. Jack reached for his phone, snapped a photo of the map, then carefully folded it and slid it into his jacket. Behind him, Shadow let out a low, trembling whimper. Jack turned. The dog was twitching in his sleep, legs moving slightly as if running. A deep whine escaped its throat. Jack stepped closer and gently touched the shepherd's shoulder. "Hey," he whispered. "You're safe." The dog startled slightly, then blinked, looking up at him with blurry eyes. Jack sat beside him, resting one arm loosely over the dog's back. He hadn't allowed himself this level of connection in a long time. On the small table near the kitchen, among a pile of personal effects he hadn't unpacked, a photograph leaned against a bottle of aspirin. He picked it up. The picture was taken in 2021, an award ceremony. In it, Emily stood tall in her dark tactical gear, a medal just handed to her by some city official. She looked uncomfortable, smiling through clenched teeth. And beside her, sitting with perfect discipline, was a younger version of the shepherd now at Jack's feet, Shadow. Jack's throat tightened. He flipped the photo and found a small handwritten line on the back, "To the only guy who listens better than you, love E." So, it was true. Shadow wasn't a stray. He was Emily's K-9, assigned to her unit after a 2-year Navy contract and extensive trauma response training. That explained the way he moved, the way he watched, the way he had led Jack to the beacon. Someone had tried to erase that connection, left Shadow to die out there, injured and alone. But he hadn't left. He'd waited, guarded something, and when Jack came close enough, he'd found him. "You never gave up," Jack murmured. Shadow let out a soft grunt and dropped his head onto Jack's leg. Jack sat in the silence a while longer, the weight of the photo in one hand, the dog's warmth pressed against his knee. The heater buzzed faintly from the far corner. Outside, the snow had begun to fall again. In the morning, he would go to Northridge. He didn't have approval, and he didn't care. This wasn't about protocol anymore. It was about Emily. And now that he knew Shadow had been with her, part of him believed she might still be alive. He looked at the dog again. "Tomorrow," he said softly. "We go together." Dawn broke reluctantly over Pinebridge, gray light diffusing through thick clouds that still hung low above the ridge. Snow had fallen again during the night, fine, dry powder that blanketed everything with unnerving quiet. Jack Monroe stood outside the sheriff's office with a thermos of coffee in one hand and a folder of hastily printed photos in the other. He was already in uniform, though his expression looked more like a soldier's than a small-town officer's. The collar of his coat was frosted with snow, and his boots were damp from the morning walk. Inside, the office buzzed with the quiet routine of rural law enforcement. 2 deputies leaned over dispatch reports. A young woman in flannel, Rachel Deeks, 26, new to the department and still clinging to her wide-eyed optimism, offered Jack a nod, which he returned with a tight, distracted smile. Rachel was the kind of person who brought baked goods to meetings and wrote her reports in cursive. Her father had been a deputy here until a heart attack took him on patrol 2 winters ago. She had joined in his place. At the back of the room sat Acting Chief Sarah Breen, a woman in her late 40s with sloped shoulders and streaks of gray tied back in a no-nonsense bun. Her body looked built from practical decisions, flat boots, thick sweaters, hands always near a mug or report. Her loss, a son buried young and far too soon, gave her kindness a certain shape, rigid around the edges, soft in the center if you earned it. She was seated behind a stack of paperwork, frowning at her reading glasses like they'd betrayed her. Jack stepped in and laid the folder down. "Chief, I need your approval for a focused search out at Northridge. 1 day pass. No backup required. Just me." Sarah didn't look up. "You know that area is off-grid, Jack. Unless you have a missing persons report or a verified signal, I can't sign off on that." He tapped the folder. Inside were photos of the smashed beacon, the red-marked map, and a dated picture of Emily Carter beside Shadow. She finally glanced up. "This is from a closed case." "It's not closed to me," Jack said quietly. "And that dog out there didn't lead me to junk. He led me to her beacon." Sarah sighed and rubbed her forehead. "I've already been called reckless for taking you in. You come with a file thick enough to stop a bullet." "I'm not asking for a convoy," Jack replied. "I'm telling you I'm going, with or without a signature." The room fell still. Rachel glanced over, brows raised, but stayed silent. Sarah finally leaned back, considering. You get hurt out there, I can't cover you. You go missing, it's on you. Understood? Jack's jaw clenched. Then at least I'll know. Sarah didn't sign anything, but she didn't stop him either. 2 hours later, Jack and Shadow trudged through knee-deep snow into the forest north of town. The dog wore a reinforced harness with a side pouch for water and gauze. His leg was healing slowly, but pain didn't seem to slow him. He moved with deliberate purpose, nose close to the ground, occasionally pausing to sniff the air or test the wind. The map had led them to a stretch of woods Jack barely remembered from his academy wilderness training. The terrain here was uneven, cut by old trails that had long since vanished beneath fallen trees and undergrowth, now buried in white. Frost clung to every branch. Silence pressed in thickly, broken only by the crunch of their footsteps. 3 hours passed. Jack checked his compass, then the photo again. The red X on the map matched the terrain, a crescent ridge, shallow slope near a dried-up stream now frozen solid. He stopped to rest, his breath misting in the cold, heart racing from exertion and nerves. Shadow circled the clearing slowly, then froze. The dog lowered his snout to a mound near a crooked pine and began to dig with sudden urgency. Jack dropped to his knees beside him and began scooping away snow with his gloved hands. Metal clanged faintly beneath. They cleared the last layer, revealing a square steel hatch nearly flush with the earth. The corners were rusted, and a heavy lock had once secured the latch, now broken. Jack stared at it. This was no ranger shelter. This was off the grid. He hesitated only a moment before gripping the handle and heaving it upward. It resisted, groaned, then gave way with a scraping sound that echoed into the trees. The air below smelled of damp metal, rot, and something else, something like copper. Jack clicked on his flashlight and descended the short ladder into darkness. The bunker was crude, cinder block walls, a metal shelf half collapsed in the corner, a rusted chair, broken light fixtures hanging by exposed wires. The temperature dropped sharply inside, like the cold had a soul here and didn't want company. On the floor, just beyond the base of the ladder, lay a black fabric patch, Emily's unit badge, torn at the edge. Nearby, an empty medical syringe, its cap missing, and smeared across the lower wall, a stain, dark, dried, human blood. Jack's breath caught in his throat. She had been here. Shadow stayed at the edge of the hatch, whimpering but not entering. Jack stepped deeper into the space, slowly scanning. There were no bodies, no sound, but every inch of the bunker screamed of something violent and sudden, a place abandoned not long ago. He picked up the badge, brushing the dust off. The weight of it felt heavier than its size. "Emily," he whispered. He turned off the flashlight and let his eyes adjust, then climbed back into the snow. Shadow leaned into him as he emerged, tail wagging weakly. "She was here," Jack murmured. Shadow didn't need to understand the words. He already knew. Snow crunched softly beneath Jack Monroe's boots as he stepped away from the steel hatch and scanned the tree line. The discovery in the bunker still rang in his ears, Emily's torn badge, the dried blood on the cinder block wall, the single syringe abandoned in the corner like a punctuation mark on something unfinished. The air stung his face, sharp with cold. But that wasn't what made his breath tight. It was the silence, a silence too controlled, too still. He raised his portable radio to his mouth. Unit 12 to base, requesting immediate response. Coordinates to follow. Possible recovery site. Static. He tried again, shifted frequencies. Still nothing. Jack turned in a slow circle, trying to get a stronger signal, but it was dead across the board, jammed, not weak. He narrowed his eyes, the military instincts in him sharpening. Signal jamming was no accident. It required planning, intent, and proximity. Shadow stood alert beside the hatch, his ears high, nose twitching with unease. Jack watched him as the dog sniffed the air and stepped forward, tail stiff, body tense. Then he stopped, nose pressed to a tree stump half covered in frost. There, barely visible against the bark, was a small black lens, no larger than a bottle cap, a camera concealed in a notch of wood, aimed directly at the bunker entrance. Jack's gut tightened. Someone had been watching them. Maybe still was. He turned toward the ridge, hand on his sidearm. The snow absorbed sound, but he'd spent enough time in combat to know when he was being watched. He couldn't see them, but he felt them, eyes hidden behind branches, breath held just beyond reach. Shadow gave a low, guttural growl, the first sound Jack had heard from him since their journey began. Then came the shot, a single crack, sharp and fast. Jack ducked, rolling behind a tree, drawing his weapon. Shadow yelped. The dog had lunged in front of him, intercepting the bullet that would have hit Jack's side. He collapsed in the snow with a pained whimper, blood quickly soaking the powder beneath him. Jack fired blindly toward the ridge, forcing the shooter back, then dove toward the dog. "Shadow, stay with me," he said, his voice rough with urgency. The wound was high on the shoulder, bleeding but not immediately fatal. Jack wrapped his scarf around the dog's chest, applying pressure, and pulled them both behind a downed log. His breathing was fast, his mind racing. He checked the snow, no other footprints but their own. The shooter had taken high ground and left no trace behind. Jack's thoughts surged backward. Reynolds. 6 months earlier, a closed-door intel meeting in Denver, 2 days before the Pier 17 raid. Emily had spoken up, voice steady but low. "Sir, we may have a breach. A high-level one. Someone's leaking operation details." Reynolds hadn't denied it. He just smiled, tilting his head. "Those are serious accusations, Carter. You should be careful where you aim them." She hadn't backed down. "Then help me aim them right." Reynolds had gone silent, then dismissed her. Jack hadn't thought much of it at the time. Reynolds was calm to the point of smugness, the kind of man who never sweated, never stuttered. His past was glossy, without cracks, former JAG officer, spearheaded 3 high-profile cases, decorated. But something had felt wrong. Jack looked down at Shadow, whose breathing was shallow now, legs trembling. He couldn't stay here. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and someone wanted them dead. With one arm, Jack lifted the shepherd, cradling him as best he could, and started moving west, away from the bunker, through snow and shadow. His mind burned with questions. If Reynolds had orchestrated Emily's disappearance, if this bunker was used to hold her, then this was more than negligence. It was a cover-up. He didn't know if Emily was alive, but someone had tried to bury the trail, and they just found it again. The wind howled through the timbered ridges of Northridge as Jack trudged uphill, Shadow cradled tightly in his arms. Snow clung to the folds of Jack's jacket, and blood, dark and drying, had begun to soak through the scarf wrapped around the dog's shoulder. The mountains loomed ahead, but Jack had no destination in mind anymore. He was simply moving away from the shooter, from the shattered silence of the bunker, and from the realization that this ran deeper than betrayal. He found shelter beneath an overhang, a shallow cave carved out by water and time. It wasn't much, but it blocked the wind and shielded them from open view. Jack laid Shadow gently on a folded coat, using snow to clean the wound again. The dog whimpered but didn't resist. His eyes, half-lidded and glassy, flicked open every few seconds, checking Jack's face. "You're still here," Jack whispered. "Stay with me a little longer." Outside, the light was fading. He didn't know how long he sat there waiting, maybe an hour, maybe more. Then something, a sound. It came faintly, barely audible beneath the wind. A human voice, strained. Jack went still. It could have been the wind playing tricks again. But then it came again, a whisper echoing. He stepped to the edge of the cave, ears straining. There, somewhere below, faint, desperate, "Help! Jack's breath caught. He grabbed his flashlight, took one last glance at Shadow, and started toward the source. It led him back through the trees, down a frozen path slick with ice and pine needles. He moved quickly but carefully, every step pressing into uncertainty. Then the sound grew louder. Please. There, behind a thicket of cedar, Jack crouched low, sweeping his light across the ground until he saw it, a steel grate, mostly buried, different from the bunker hatch, narrower, meant not for storage but containment. He dropped to his knees and cleared away the snow. "Emily," he called softly, not daring to raise his voice. "Emily, is that you?" Silence, then movement. A cough and a broken reply, "Jack." His chest tightened. He yanked at the grate. It didn't budge. He grabbed a nearby branch, wedged it under the edge, and leveraged his body weight. With a screech of metal, the cover lifted. A ladder descended into dimness. He climbed down quickly, flashlight leading the way. The air inside was thick, moldy, metallic, stale. The room at the bottom was small, concrete walls, one flickering overhead bulb powered by a dying battery, a cot, a bucket, shackles bolted into the floor. And in the corner, collapsed but alive, was Emily Carter. She was thinner than he remembered, her face hollow, lips cracked, her dark hair matted and tangled. But her eyes, even sunken, still burned with that stubborn light he knew so well. "Jack," she croaked. "You came." He dropped beside her, heart hammering. "You're alive." She gave a tired smile. "Barely." He checked the chains. One had already broken loose. The other, rusted through, snapped with a hard pull. He supported her gently as she leaned into him, breath shallow, body trembling. "Who did this?" he asked. "Reynolds," she rasped. "He runs it all." Jack froze. Emily coughed hard before continuing. "He wasn't just leaking intel. He built the whole pipeline, drugs, weapons, through the Bureau's own raids. He uses us to clean the scene, then filters the real goods through black market contacts." "And you found out?" She nodded. "Got too close. I documented everything, kept a log, names, times, locations, hid it in my boot. They took everything, but they didn't find that." Her hand trembled as she reached toward a small crack in the floor beneath the cot. From it, she pulled a small leather-bound notebook, worn and stained with water damage, but intact. Jack took it, flipping through pages filled with coded entries, maps, initials, symbols, years of undercover work. "They thought I was dead," she whispered. "But Reynolds, he wanted to be sure." Jack gritted his teeth. "We're getting out now." But Emily shook her head slowly. "Wait. Where's Shadow?" Jack hesitated. "He's alive. Hurt, but alive." Tears welled in her eyes. "He stayed all this time. He never left." Jack helped her to her feet, one arm wrapped around her waist. She could barely walk, but each step was driven by something deeper than strength. They made their way back to the ladder, and as they climbed into the fading daylight, Jack felt the weight of something shift, not just on his back, but inside him. They reached the cave just as dusk deepened. Shadow lifted his head weakly, his tail giving the faintest thump against the coat. Emily collapsed beside him, stroking his ears with trembling fingers. "I knew you'd keep watch," she whispered. "Good boy." The night wrapped the forest in a darkness so dense even the snow couldn't brighten it. Trees blurred into shadow, and every gust of wind howled like a warning. But Jack Monroe didn't stop. With Emily Carter leaning weakly against his shoulder and Shadow limping just ahead, he moved through the pines as if something ancient and relentless was chasing them. And maybe it was. Emily's weight against him was feather-light but alive. She hadn't spoken since they left the cave, her head resting against his chest, eyes half shut. She was drained, her body a ghost of the officer she once was. Yet there was something burning inside her, a flicker of defiance that hadn't dimmed. Her fingers clutched the small leather-bound notebook against her chest like it held the weight of her life. Shadow trotted just ahead, his gait uneven, but his nose always to the wind. He paused now and then, checking the air, glancing back. The wound on his shoulder had reopened from the strain, leaving droplets of red in the snow. But the shepherd didn't falter. He had one job: lead them home. Jack's breath came in short, tight bursts, fogging in the cold. His arms ached from carrying Emily, and his feet stung with every step across the uneven, frozen forest floor. The snow came faster now, swirling in silver sheets around them, as if trying to hide them or trap them. Far behind, the trees creaked, and the wind carried something heavier than sound, the knowledge that time had run out. Whoever shot Shadow knew they had failed. They would come again, better armed, more desperate. Jack had seen this kind of panic before. When power slipped through greedy hands, it always turned violent. But they had the evidence now: Emily's notebook, the badge, the bunker, and the truth. Truth Reynolds had tried to bury in the snow. Jack shifted Emily's weight slightly and muttered, "Almost there." She stirred, voice a dry whisper. "Is he still ahead?" "Yeah, he hasn't looked back in miles." Emily managed a faint smile. "Still protecting me, even now." Jack didn't respond. His throat was too tight. They broke through the thickest part of the woods around 3 a.m., stepping into a clearing where the snow lay deeper, untouched. Jack knew this place. It was near Timberline Pass, less than half a mile from the old ranger station. He paused to catch his breath, shielding Emily with his coat as Shadow stopped near the edge of the trees, ears alert. That's when Jack saw it, a flash of light, white, blinding, from above. Then another. A distant rumble cut through the stillness, growing louder. Jack looked up. A helicopter, not military, not Reynolds' men. Rescue. The searchlight swept over the clearing again, catching Jack in its beam. He raised a hand, waving frantically, then looked at Emily. Her eyes fluttered open, relief flickering in them before closing again. Shadow barked once, short, sharp, then collapsed onto the snow, tail twitching faintly. The chopper descended slowly, rotors whipping the trees, snow swirling like a storm of ash. A side hatch opened, and 2 rescue officers leapt down, wearing winter gear and tactical harnesses. One of them, Officer Marissa Kent, a solid-built woman in her 30s with braided dark hair and sharp eyes, reached Jack first. "You Jack Monroe?" she shouted over the roar. He nodded. 2 victims, one injured, one barely walking. Her gaze swept over him, then to Emily and Shadow. "We've got them. Medics in the chopper." The second rescuer, Danny Ruiz, a slim man with a neatly trimmed beard and too many tools on his belt, gently took Emily from Jack's arms while Kent knelt beside Shadow. "This dog took a bullet?" she asked. "He saved both of us," Jack said hoarsely. Kent nodded once. "Then he rides with us." Within minutes, they were airborne. Jack sat beside Emily and Shadow, his coat still wrapped around her shoulders. Her hand found his under the blanket, grip weak but steady. Below them, the forest shrank. So did the darkness. When they landed at Pinebridge Regional, the scene outside the ER was a controlled frenzy: FBI vehicles, police cruisers, uniforms, and suits everywhere. Jack helped Emily out, notebook still clutched tightly in her arms. The next 12 hours blurred into interrogations, signatures, and confessions. Jack sat beside Emily through it all, while she recounted with terrifying calm the months of captivity, the smuggling routes, the names, every detail backed by her notebook. By dusk, the warrant was signed. Leader Warren Reynolds was arrested in his office at the Bureau's State Division headquarters, along with 3 agents and a logistics manager. The news hit like wildfire. Headlines used words like conspiracy, treason, and betrayal. But for Jack, it was just closure. 3 days later, back in Pinebridge, Jack stood outside the animal clinic. Shadow lay resting inside, hooked up to fluids, his wound cleaned and stitched. Emily, still recovering, sat in the passenger seat of Jack's truck, bundled in a thick coat, eyes fixed on the vet window. "They say he'll walk again," she murmured. "He'll run again," Jack replied. Then came the visit from Chief Sarah Breen. She arrived in her usual gray coat, scarf tucked high, holding a manila envelope. She handed it to Jack, her expression unreadable. "Commendation paperwork, Medal of Valor, Special Field Recognition, full reinstatement," she said. Jack looked at the envelope, then back at her. "I don't want it." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Then what do you want?" Jack exhaled. "A quiet job here. Pinebridge PD. And a dog to come home to." She considered that, then gave a slow nod. "That we can do." Spring returned to Pinebridge as softly as it had once disappeared. The snow had long melted from the rooftops and mountain trails, replaced by early wildflowers and the song of melting creeks. A breeze stirred the pine trees, carrying scents of warm earth and something gentler, something healing. It had been exactly 1 year, 1 year since the night shadow led Jack Monroe into the snowbound woods. 1 year since Emily Carter was pulled from beneath the earth and brought back into the light. Now, in the heart of town where an abandoned ranger station once stood, the Shadow Sanctuary opened its doors. It wasn't large, 2 wings shaped like open arms, one for the therapy center, the other for canine rehabilitation. The exterior was crafted from local timber, polished stone, and wide glass windows that let in the sun. Children's laughter echoed from inside, bouncing off murals of dogs painted running through forests and meadows. The biggest of those murals showed a German shepherd curled beneath a tree, his eyes watchful, his body at ease. The real Shadow lay not far from it, resting on a thick blanket beneath a handmade wooden sign carved with his name. Now 8 years old, his coat had regained its sheen, though his right shoulder still carried a scar where the bullet passed through. His gaze was calm, his presence steady. Around him, children gathered quietly, never too loud, as if they instinctively understood this dog had walked through darkness and come back with something sacred. One child, a girl of about 9, knelt beside him. Her name was Ava, small and pale, with wispy blonde hair and a blue sweater 2 sizes too big. She had been brought to the center 6 weeks earlier, placed in the care of her aunt after being removed from an abusive home. Ava hadn't spoken a full sentence in years, not since she was 5. The trauma had frozen something in her throat. Words became fear, and silence became survival. But Shadow didn't ask her to speak. He simply lay still each day as she sat beside him, sometimes drawing, sometimes crying quietly into his fur. And today, on the day the center opened to the town, Ava leaned forward, brushed her hand softly across the shepherd's back, and whispered so faintly the wind nearly took it, "I'm not scared anymore." Emily stood nearby, watching, her arms crossed, the ghost of a smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. Her recovery hadn't been quick, but it had been whole. The weight loss reversed, her strength returned. She kept her hair shorter now, a practical choice, but also symbolic, as if shedding the past inch by inch. Her new uniform wasn't a badge. It was a blue fleece vest embroidered with the words, "Shadow Sanctuary Program, Director." Beside her stood Jack, now firmly rooted in Pinebridge. His uniform bore the same department badge he had once tried to run from, but his shoulders carried it differently now. He no longer flinched at silence. He no longer tried to outrun the snow. He simply stood and stayed. They watched together as townsfolk filtered into the courtyard, carrying warm casseroles and folding chairs, donations of leashes, food bowls, handmade collars. Dogs of all sizes wagged their tails in slow arcs. Veterans, children, retirees, faces all marked in different ways by life, had come not for celebration but recognition. Chief Sarah Breen arrived last, as she always did, dressed in a clean charcoal coat, her steel-gray bun pinned tighter than usual. She brought with her a stack of small wooden plaques. She placed them gently on a table at the front of the gathering, her expression unreadable, but her eyes misted in the corners. She said nothing as she passed Jack, just gave him a single nod, the kind that meant everything had come full circle. At the podium, Emily cleared her throat. "I never thought I'd stand in front of people again," she began, her voice strong. "And I never thought the one who'd bring me back would have 4 legs and more patience than I ever deserved." Laughter bubbled from the crowd, warm and light. She continued, "This place was built for those who've walked through fire. But not just the people, the dogs, too. Every canine who comes here carries a story, a scar, a journey, and we won't ask them for anything except to stay. To stay beside those who need them." Jack took her place next, holding a small ribbon-cutting shears. Shadow, still lying nearby, lifted his head. "You know, I used to believe dogs were just trained tools," Jack said. "Trained to follow, to obey. But Shadow, he didn't follow orders. He followed a bond, and he never gave up." He looked at Ava, who still sat beside the shepherd. "If he taught us anything, it's that healing doesn't always come loud. Sometimes it arrives quietly, nose first, with a heartbeat beside you in the dark." They cut the ribbon. Applause followed, not thunderous, but gentle, like rain tapping on windows. The kind of applause you give when words are too small. Later, as the sun dipped low and families began drifting home, Jack sat beneath the tree beside Shadow. Emily joined him, a cup of cocoa in hand. "Did you ever think it would end like this?" she asked. Jack looked out across the sanctuary, the playfields, the trails, the children's garden just beginning to bloom. "No," he said, "but I'm glad it did." Shadow rested his head on Jack's boot, tail giving a single soft thump. Emily smiled. "So, what's next?" Jack shrugged. "Tomorrow's training with a new rescue. A golden retriever named Finn, likes to chew on boots." Emily chuckled. "He'll fit right in." And as the last rays of sunlight painted the sanctuary gold, the wind passed through the trees like a whisper from the past, no longer a warning, but a reminder. They had found their way home. We don't choose where our stories begin, but we do get to choose who walks beside us as they continue. Shadow wasn't just a dog. He was a memory that refused to be silenced, a heartbeat that stayed behind when everyone else had moved on. He didn't just find a home. He built one, in the eyes of a frightened child, in the hand of a veteran trembling with unseen wounds, in the quiet strength of 2 officers who refused to give up. Shadow reminded us of what it means to be found, to be held, and to heal. Maybe in our own lives, the pain isn't always visible. Maybe healing starts with showing up for a neighbor, a friend, or even a forgotten dog in the snow. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs a little light today. Leave a comment, subscribe, and join us for more stories that matter, not just to the world, but to the soul. And may God bless you, wherever you are in your journey. You are not alone. And someone out there, just like Shadow, is waiting to walk with you.